Hi, welcome to Write More Light. My name is Sarah. I'm with the Midwest Writing Center, and this is a web series on which you will find either I will give a short writing lesson or I will interview somebody who is an expert in a field related to the arts. Today, I am happy to tell you, is an interview day. Following the interview, I'll give updates on the Midwest Writing Center, and then we'll have a writing prompt for you to take home with you or wherever you are, wherever you like to write. I am so happy to introduce to you someone who I've known for I think a couple of years now, who consistently delights me with his writing. Oh, I didn't clarify how to pronounce his last name, so he'll correct me or he won't. Thomas Lerczak is a master of science, master of environmental sciences. Um, from Southern Illinois University. He spent 28 years as a natural resource professional. He is a naturalist. I think he's a birder and somebody who really loves nature. He's the author of the book Side Channels, which is a collection of nature writing and also part memoir. And he has a gorgeous blog that I see a lot of the pieces before they go up, and I am always delighted to see how they well, how he thinks really, because he manages to be both sentimental and funny. In that blog, I will link here in the description of this video. It's called The River Landing, and it is, I think, just a delight. I don't have a better word for it. Tom has also authored lots of articles in his what was it, 28 years of work as a naturalist. So we've really got a nature expert on here today for our talk on nature writing. Tom, thank you so much for hanging out with us today. I please let me know if I pronounced your last name correctly.
You are correct. And thank you for having me.
That is always well, one, I always love hanging out with you. I hope you know that by now. But I'm always so happy when I don't butcher a name. So we're gonna start out sort of softballing it because I don't think everyone in the world, including me, I think I could probably give you a real layman's description, but not a proper one. What is a naturalist?
A naturalist, I think, is someone who um, really from the moment you wake up in the morning to going to sleep, nature is always in the back of your mind. What you decide to do with the day and pay attention to nature, uh, all aspects. My particular interest has always been more in birds than anything, and so if you're with me anywhere, even downtown Davenport, I'm always looking around, and some people find it hard to have a conversation with a birder because you're not making eye contact. You're looking around and in the skies and trying to find things. And so someone who a naturalist is not necessarily an expert, but just someone who pursues nature and tries to learn about it all the time. That would be my definition.
Thank you. You know, I in my grad program, one of the gentlemen who graduated in the winter, the first piece I read by him was about birding, and because of reading some of your work, I felt like I could interact with it a lot more competently than I would have otherwise. And it wasn't really about birding, right? Birding was the vehicle through which he talked about being in love with his wife, um, but it was about birding. I've kind of always wanted to thank you for that, but is never on my mind. So,
Oh, well,
um,
I appreciate that.
yeah, it's a really special memoir he wrote. I think one day we will all read it and be very happy we did. Um, yeah, thank you for that description of a naturalist. I know that with your really extensive education in natural sciences, you certainly have more expertise in what that may entail than the rest of us. So I think that that's going to be a benefit as we move into how to incorporate that into writing. So that really long segue. Um, when you think about nature writing, what does that mean?
That's a good question because when I started thinking about this interview, I asked myself, what is nature writing? And I came up with a lot of different examples. I thought, well, scientific writing, you're writing about nature uh, using a lot of data, but it's writing about nature. So is that science? Is that nature writing? Um, or writing about what about astronomy? I mean, the universe is nature. It's all nature. Is that nature writing? I think most people, when they think of nature writing, they think of a literary work that is uses nature as the theme, and so not necessarily astronomy, but I think that could be one of the first books I read on nature writing is called the Nature Writing Handbook, and I know from one of your previous Write More Lights, you don't really care for guys that much. But this one is a book really about writing in general. And um, it gives that definition of nature writing that I mentioned. But it also says that aspects of Herman Melville could be considered nature writing, and Mark Twain, and um, so it may not be the entire book or essay, but a part of it.
I
And
would. Oh, go
uh,
ahead.
I think a big part of nature writing is trying to really, we think of nature as separate from human beings, and human civilization is here, nature is over here, but we're all a part of it. It's all one whole, and I think that in a lot of ways you're always writing about nature, because there's an old saying that we should be living as a part of nature and not apart from nature.
I love that. I'm going to be saying that and annoying a lot of people with. Um, yeah, I also I think it's important to remember that um like as human beings, we are just animals.
Right, right. And that's why when I started thinking about what is nature writing, I thought, well, I'm part of nature too. And so, but I think most people think of it as something that's, outdoors, non-human, natural, a natural area.
Sorry about that.
It's okay.
I do wanna say my gripe with guides is that people use them as a religion. And I see a lot of people get just really caught up and stress themselves out because they think they're not doing it right because someone somewhere called themselves an expert. I would definitely read a book about nature writing if I wanted to get into nature writing and and hit the marks on it. I think that's different, however, slightly. Um, and especially
Yeah,
because I'm somebody who doesn't know about it.
and it's the book is not really about nature. It's about writing, and in general, and it has the same things in it that you would find in any guide to writing. And I like what you said in the previous Write More Light about that, about writing in general, and that the guidebook doesn't know you, it doesn't know your style, and it's a piece of information that you can use, but it doesn't have to be that way.
Thank you. Um, and I will put the nature writing handbook in the description of the video as well. And you mentioned Twain, who is I only have really one or two complaints about him. Um, and I've read Roughing It, which is the thing that probably would come to mind when thinking about
Right.
Twain and nature writing, although, he loves his river. Um, and I never really thought of it that way. So thank you for putting that in my head. I think so much of it is about the lens that we go through life with, and It just doesn't occur to you till later.
Right. And I think at that time when he was writing that book, there were only, a few writers who were what you might call nature writers, Henry David Thoreau and uh, Gilbert White in England, a few others, but it wasn't really a genre at that point like it is today.
Yeah, and I've got my gripes with genre too.
Yeah, right. I know.
Um, okay, so this is a question I find hard to word, so please bear with me. But um, now I know you spend, I would guess, I guess, as much time as you possibly can in nature. So I assume that you go outside because you love to go outside. But when you find yourself in nature, are you thinking about, creating something, or is it more like because you are so much a part of nature in your heart in the way you navigate the world that when you sit down to write, nature is just already there, already imbued in everything that comes out?
I think I'm always kind of looking for ideas, and I don't always find them. I think 9 out of 10 times I don't find an idea, or I found it and I don't realize I found it until much later. And when I might sit down and start to write, well, if I'm going outdoors, specifically to, sort of study nature, a lot of times I'll bring a journal with me and sit down and write right out there in the woods of what I'm thinking. And sometimes those journal notes will turn into an article or a blog post or something. It'll be its starting off point. Uh, but I'm always kind of looking around. I've sort of trained myself to as a birder. You're always birding, always. If you're in line at McDonald's waiting for a cup of coffee, you're birding. And so I'm always kind of thinking about things like that. And uh, birds are always migrating. They're either migrating in the springtime somewhere or in the fall. There's only a couple of short times during the year where they're not moving. In the midwinter and uh, right after the breeding season in the summertime for a short period. But other than that, they're either moving on their spring migration or fall migration. So I'm always looking around what kind of birds are around. In the springtime, which ones show up at a certain time of year and which one is the first one to show up. And so I'm always thinking about things like that. Probably drive people crazy with it.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
Okay, great. Um, that's I think birds are a really great segue if somebody is like, I don't, can you still hear me okay?
sure.
Okay, sorry. Someone started mowing their lawn, and I know that usually the background noise gets filtered out all right, but I don't know for sure. Um, I think birds are a really good, not segue, but introduction into nature, if you will, because even, whatever city, whatever major metropolis you're in, there are birds. Actually, look at that. I thought of a favorite poem of mine, Jamal May's There Are Birds Here, which is about the city of Detroit. It's I'd say like a love letter to the city of Detroit. Um, so if you're like sort of just vaguely interested, you don't have to be a birder, but you will find yourself somewhere where there are birds. And that's I think a nice way to start. I also chicken tending has gotten really popular recently, and I think that that's a good sort of intro to birds if one needs that because they're domesticated, yes, but there's no really domesticating a bird, I think. As much as you maybe can train them and they know where to go for food or shelter or whatever, you're still looking at an animal that exists only on its reflexes.
Right. It's got its innate behaviors that it does no matter where it is, no matter whether if it's wild or in a cage. We just got some chickens here at our new home. We recently moved from in town in Macomb, Illinois, to just out of town. We're about 5 miles out of town, and we've got a little bit of property too. And so we recently got ourselves some chickens, and my wife Julie uh, built the chicken coop and the yard around the chicken coop, and taking care of the chickens is pretty much her thing, her project. But they've been interesting to watch as they grew up from chicks, and now they're quite bigger, but they're not quite ready to lay eggs yet. But they're over there. You know, I'm from in the wild. I would be looking at quail or turkeys in a natural area, and you know they behave, you know, very similar ways with their innate behaviors.
You know what I find fun about that too? You reminded me with turkeys is that you can just and you know when I look at symbolism for things, I look at it let me rephrase this. Symbolism can be anything. Um but I tend to, if I'm looking into what something may mean symbolically, and it's something that I've come across in my life, I'll look at it through whatever cultural lens seems appropriate. So you can do that if you're not feeling comfortable maybe with nature writing, you're experimenting with it. You can certainly look into, I saw I'm trying to think of something slightly less obvious. And I can't. We'll go with turkey. I was gonna say like a robin, a goldfinch, a cardinal, and those are not. Those are, we have those symbolisms just on us in the world all the time. But if you look up, you know, it what does it mean to blank culture, turkey, right? Symbolism, turkey, culture. You can you can find plenty of metaphor there that's already built up through a cultural history, and you can use that in your piece if actually staying there and setting up nature um as a focal point or a lens or a character, because setting so often is a character. It's a totally different topic though. Then that can be a starting point. uh,
For an essay, you mean, or a story?
yeah, for whatever it is. If I'm saying all of this because it occurs to me that that might be a way for me to get into it is there's character sees a wild turkey and then expand from there about the character based on the symbolism of the turkey or on their creepy little beards if you're so inclined. I love their creepy little beards.
Whatever can get you started, you know, whatever idea comes up.
And I've been thinking too, your writing, even when it is not in nature, you've written some pieces that take place in I guess in my head it's a bar and grill. And some pieces that take place in a car. But so I think so much of it, and I don't know if you know this about yourself, but so much of it does revolve around that understanding of environment that I would say that certainly nature is or setting is a character in your pieces because the story doesn't exist without that element.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And you know, lately I've been branching out into fiction, and I've written a couple of short stories, and they're out there, you know, with the journals and attempting to get those published. And the one that you mentioned, the bar and grill, is a fictional bar and grill at a fictional town along the Mississippi
I
River.
was gonna say I know
Uh,
it's on the river.
yeah, and it's called the Shotgun Shack
It's so
Bar and Grill.
good.
And I had this idea long time ago, maybe over 30 years ago, of going into a bar where there in the town I lived in, there was a bar and grill on the river bluff, and you could sit at the bar and look out the picture window and watch the river all day and and drink. And so I had this idea of going to the bar in the morning and sitting there and drinking all day and birding and making a birding list of everything that I would see from the bar. And I called it birding from a bar stool. And so many years went by, decades went by, and I, talked about writing it. And so I finally wrote the story, and I never did it. Um, the bar closed; it's not there anymore. But in the fictional story, it exists, and it's about sitting at a bar drinking all day and making a bird list and interacting with the people that come into the bar, and they look at you with your binoculars and your bird guide, and like, what are you doing here? And um,
I I I know you can see me and the other folks can't. I've been like doing this whole time while you've been talking. I think this is genius, and I would pay to do that. If if you say we're gonna go, I don't know, there's probably a bar somewhere. I know there are. If you're like, we're gonna go here, you pay me $5, I'll tell you what the birds are, and we're just gonna write. I would do that right now.
yeah,
I think we should do
that
this,
would be fun.
but we can talk
Yeah,
about that later. Um,
yeah.
yes. Uh, I think
Well,
this
there
is
was one
genius.
time, um, they have in Illinois, we have these events, this event called the Spring Bird Count, where people all over the state go out on one day in May, in early May, and count every bird you can find and make a list of it. And it's called the Spring Bird Count. And you do it all day. You start at sunrise and you go to the end of the day. And um, I haven't done those in a while, but back when I was doing it, um, my wife Julie was with me, and we were in the middle of our bird count. I think it was around noontime or so, and we went into this little bar in Bath, Illinois. Uh, and actually, it was an old barge with like a cabin on it, and it was sitting in the river in Bath. Bath is a very small town. Hardly, I mean, you could the stereotype way of saying it is you blink your eyes and you're through it, and you blink your eyes and you won't even know you went through it. But we went into this bar. It's kind of a rough town, rough bar, and we weren't married yet. And I was trying to show her what my life was like, and so we went into this bar, kind of a rough place, like I said, and I've got my binoculars and my bird guide, and felt a little funny because people were looking at us, and I'm looking out the window with the binoculars and talking about which birds I'm seeing, holding up the bird guide, so you can just imagine what that was like. And during the conversation, we heard other people talking, and we heard one man say, "I'll kill her if you want me to," and that's the kind of rough place that was. And we kind of ignored that, and then we left. And I looked back after we got into the parking lot, and that man who said that was watching us. And I thought, good thing we left.
Yeah. Yeah,
So birding from a bar stool can maybe be a little bit dangerous.
that's all right. We're gonna do it in a group.
Yeah,
We're gonna create a book together, each of us with our different birding barstool moments. I want to now open a bar on the river. I'm having all these ideas. Maybe we'll do a picnic instead.
yeah. So that particular story is a chapter in a novel I'm writing about of the fictional Mississippi River town, and there's a biological lab in the town, a state lab, and that they do research on the river. And the main character in the book is a biologist who does river research and gets into all kinds of situations with other characters and with conflicts with his boss and all. And so I'm working on that. I've got written about 30,000 words so far, and I was really making a lot of progress on it last summer. And then we decided to move. And so I had to put it on a shelf and I need to get back to it.
I first love hearing that because you seem like this isn't maybe fair to say because every time I see you, you have something new. Man, I turned do not disturb on so it wouldn't make noise, but I didn't close my email. Uh, every time I see you, you've written something new, but that may not be fair. I see you maybe once a month. Um, but it's really heartening to hear that, you also take breaks from pieces. And I want to say sometimes those pieces need a break from us too. Just yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I read a book that was recommended at last year's Midwest Writing Center, and one of the workshops was novel writing, and the presenter recommended a book.
Rebecca McCanna, she's incredible.
Right, and the book was How to Write a Novel in Three Drafts. And I just read that book, and one of the recommendations was to put it aside uh, for a while and come back to it. Like even put it away for 6 months and come back to it then. And that really does work. It's almost like you haven't written it and you're reading it for the first time. And so I'm looking forward to getting back to my to that novel and finishing it, and then going through the agony of trying to get an agent and rejection.
I do want to say, just to defend myself, I love craft books. They're not all good, but I will eat them up like popcorn. I don't know why popcorn is my analogy here. Um, I'm have the wrong sheet in front of me. I used to write my questions by hand. And it turns out it's a lot more efficient if I can take my notes in the same document and then transfer that over to I know this is important content. Um, but I have too many screens on my screen and it gets confusing. Um, so I want to refer back to you brought up astronomy, and I hope this is like a wildly controversial topic because you can't argue that it's not nature.
Right.
Um, but in I don't know, in my head, when I imagine someone who's using astronomy as nature writing, it's more like they're sitting outside looking at the sky. But I don't think it needs to be uh so small, contained to that. Um, and it also led me to well that and you mentioned science so you mentioned science writing, you mentioned astronomy. Um, and I wouldn't be able to say science writing is not nature writing, but I would guess that as far as marketing goes, we want less technical language, right? To call it nature writing. But bear with me. Science fiction and the potential for nature writing therein, I think could be a really fun, really fun space to play in. Like I would say that definitely a lot of fantasy work has nature writing built in based on how specific and how intricate setting usually is in fantasy. Um, but I think sci-fi nature writing could be really interesting. And I am wondering your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I agree with you there because I mean you're creating another world and possibly another world and with maybe with life on it or not with life. And well, but I think a big part of nature writing are the word pictures, creating word pictures and describing scenes. And with science fiction, you have to do that because you want to place the reader in the world that you've created. which may be in a spaceship, or it doesn't always have to be interstellar travel, um, or with life on another planet. Eventually one day we should, if everything works right, have people on Mars, and so you could write. I mean, I've read some science fiction books about Mars, about colonizing Mars, and in the books they describe the
Terraforming
landscape. What was that?
and terraforming.
Yeah, terraforming, changing the planet into an Earth-like planet, and um, so yeah, that would be. I mean, if you wrote a story about what was happening on the surface of Mars, that would be. I mean, it's nature. It's a different planet.
Yeah, what comes to mind, I guess the first thing that I'm going to say is really environmental. And we can talk. I would love to hear your thoughts on the difference between environmental and nature writing. But I thought of Wall-E, the cartoon, the Pixar movie, which I'm getting from your face. You haven't seen it.
Mhm.
Um, it's there. I'm going to give you the synopsis because it's so gorgeous, and then you'll understand why I'm bringing it up. Um, there is one robot, android, I don't know, robot on Earth. Earth is totally abandoned, and there is no plant life. And this one little robot is just cleaning up. But it turns out, like built in, its system or whatever is that it's looking for plant life, and it finds a seedling eventually after centuries alone on this deserted planet. It finds a seedling, and that alerts some other thing to come and find it. And so the plot of the movie is saving the planet, I think, or terraforming or whatever. They found the planet was no longer hospitable. The humans took off. They left this robot behind to let us know when and if the planet becomes habitable again. So, um, it's certainly got an environmental angle, right? The idea is, we need to be stewards for the earth, I think. Um, and it is, of course, it's a visual medium. In fact, the first, I think, 10 minutes has no dialogue in it. It got an award for that. um, but I think there is so much of thinking about how the earth looks in that. Before I stray off to no, I'll go off to my second thought. My other thought. So I thought of Wall-E, and then I thought of Star Trek. And again, neither of these are I mean, all film that has dialogue, all film has a script. That's a written medium, but we're not reading it. Um, and there are moments in Star Trek where they are just dealing with plants that we don't have, or they're hypothesizing on plants that we could have, right? And that takes me to sci-fi nature writing. So going back to me asking you questions. Well, first, please respond to any of that if it is exciting to you.
Well, I think that you touched on the connection between nature writing and environmental writing, and I think that's a good point to
That
make.
was going to be my next question, and I didn't want to
Oh,
rush through it. So perfect.
oh, okay, but yeah, and I've thought about that a little bit in preparation for this interview, and that when writing about nature, it's very easy to veer off into environmental writing, which I consider more polemical. And um, because,
Can you
especially
define
today, because
can you
you know,
define polemics for us?
um, complaining, attacking something, a concept or something that's happening, or complaining about things. And it's easy to veer off into that and start doing that when you're writing about nature because of so many of the impacts that are happening today. And I mean, you could go out to a forest and start writing about how beautiful it is and the trees and identifying the trees. And then you look around and you notice non-native species that are crowding out the native species. And so you start to write about that. And Then you might walk down the trail a little further and find areas that have been clear cut, and you don't like looking at that, so you start complaining about that. And it's easy to do that. And in my early writing, back in the 90s, uh, I tended to do that quite a bit. And part of it was the influences of authors that my favorite authors. Um, Edward Abbey stands out, and he is curmudgeon and uh, very eloquent. Though he's a great writer, but you reading his books, you get the impression that he really doesn't like human beings too much. And
Happens to the
um,
best of us.
so I was reading a lot of his work back then, and I grew up in the Chicago area and lived there until I was in my mid 20s. And so everywhere around at that time and even now, uh, there's always something being destroyed, some natural area being destroyed or impacted, and um, development going on, new roads and highways. And being in that environment and reading Edward Abbey, um, I was really in the mindset of a complainer and a finger pointing and not really even being aware of my own hypocrisy. And so the writing I do today is I try to stay away from that and um, focus on if I'm writing about nature or a place in nature, that's what I'm going to write about. And I want to read books about nature that make me feel good and where I can learn something about it and not finish it and be angry and and upset about what I'm reading. I'm not saying to ignore what's happening, but personally, when I sit down to read a book, I want to enjoy it and feel good about it.
Yeah, and I think also those, I don't know, good feelings or at least not bad feeling books are more likely to inspire us to engage, really.
Become
Um,
an activist.
hmm I mean, we don't
Yeah,
have to be activists. If you're me, you are accidentally an activist all the time, but it's not a requirement. But yeah, I was thinking of, and I'd love to recommend this book to you specifically. It's called American Wildflowers, a literary field guide. It's edited and compiled by Susan Barba, who's a phenomenal editor and poet in her own right. But it's a collection of American writers on wildflowers, and it doesn't mean she doesn't discount invasive species or non-native species. But what she does that I think is really interesting about this book is that it's first each section has watercolor illustrations from um oh, I can't remember what they're called, the botanical drawings that we're used to seeing, but it's organized by oh my gosh, I had it in front of me so that I could say it correctly. It's organized by species and botanical family. Um, but it's but it's literary writing. I mean, we've got the old classics like Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson and William Carlos Williams, but then it also has Jericho Brown and Nat Diaz and Lucille Clifton, so like not people you necessarily expect. And I think that in my mind, I don't think any of those people set out to be environmental writers, excluding Walt Whitman, I guess, or sorry, nature writers. But in my mind, it works to remind us that literature is of the world. Um,
what was the author's name again?
Susan Barba, Barba. I'll send you the info. And then you also reminded me, I can't remember what you said, because I was taking notes so hard. Um, there is a beautiful exhibit at the Figge right now. So if you're local to the general Quad City area, go check that out. By Cara and Diego Romero, which is about it's I think it's called something along the lines of Indigenous Futures. Um, and they're both Indigenous Americans, but their art is about the old and sacred ways of their people and how that exists in this time and in the future. And I think that's a nice look at these combinations of elements. It's visual art and comics. Some of them are comics. Um, this combination of like the elements in which we live, the world we live in, and how maybe separate from nature we might feel, but also how we will never be separate from nature.
Sounds like that would be worth a trip going up there to look at that exhibit.
And it's on the river, so we can go to the
Yeah,
we can go to the cafe. I'm making plans. Um, yeah, you've gotten me so excited about all this stuff. I
I'm
know
going to look up that book.
it's really special. I can show you my copy. I don't know if I can lend you my copy because it's special to me. But you mentioned Edward Abbey, and I want to make sure that we get, and I do have your list of recommendations I'll put in the description of the video, but are there other folks that you tend to think of or head toward when you're feeling like it's time to read about nature?
One of the first individuals that I read nature books by and was is a man named Sigurd Olson, and he's written several books mainly about the northern Minnesota and the Boundary Waters area. And I read all of his books back in the 1980s, and his writing is the kind of nature writing I look for, where it Sigurd Olson and Edwin Wayteal, especially Edwin Wayteal, he he doesn't complain. He doesn't get angry. He doesn't point the finger at humanity about things, and he writes about nature. He manages to write about all these influences, but keeping it positive. And my favorite book, I would say my favorite book of all time, is one that he wrote called "A Naturalist Buys a Farm." And he's died in I think 1992, and a lot of his books were written in the 1950s and 60s. But he was looking for a place to retire, and so he bought an old farm in Connecticut, and with a lot of acreage, and woods and streams and fields. And he wrote this book about that farm, and each chapter is about some aspect of the natural areas on the farm. And I read that book in probably 1985, 84. And this last fall, my wife and I traveled to New England. And so I decided to read that book again and travel and visit the farm, that his property, which is now owned by, I think, the local Audubon Society. We never did make it to the farm. We put too many things on our schedule and we couldn't work it in. But I did read the book
We'll have to
again.
go back.
And yeah, and I was amazed by that book and how much that book has influenced me and my writing. And Sigurd Olson, too. I reread one of his books called Listening Point that I probably read the first time in the early 1980s. And I was just blown away by it again and realized reading it how much his writing has influenced me, not only in writing, but in the way I look at the world and the way I look at out the window and what I see compared to someone who's not thinking about nature and what they might be seeing. And his book was called Listening Point, and he had a place in northern Minnesota on a lake, Burnside Lake, where he would go and just sit there and observe nature around him. And So I thought that was a brilliant idea to do. And so this new house that my wife and I live in has some woods and a ravine and a little creek. And so I set up two cinder blocks on top of each other, and I go there in the mornings and have a cup of coffee, and that's my listening point. I'm watching you walking into your,
Yeah, I think
um,
my computer's overheating and I
oh,
didn't want to lose you.
oh, okay. I was wondering what was going on.
Um, yeah,
We're
sorry about
still
that.
on the air, I take
You,
it.
yes, yes, we are.
Yeah.
Do you have any do you have any points of entry for someone who will say is nature writing curious? It sounds like listening point is a bit of inspiration in that way for you. But if I decided today I was gonna try my hand at nature writing, which I don't think I've ever done, um, what advice would you give to a newbie?
I would say that um, try to learn a little bit about what you're going to write about. So you're writing from a foundation of knowledge. And um, I'm thinking back to a workshop that I took back in the 90s. It was a nature writing workshop. And some of the people in the class didn't really know much about um, nature, birds, plants. They were writers and they wanted to take this workshop. So we would go out every day and write something and then come back and read it to the class. And I found that the people who really didn't have a lot of knowledge, they said things like the wonderful awesomeness of nature, and it was all kind of vague. And the people who had a background in it, it was more interesting because they could draw on that knowledge to write about. So that would be my advice, to try to decide where you're going to go, learn something about it, and then go there and write about it. So you're drawing from a bank of knowledge.
That is not what I expected at all, and I think really, really fun. Um, just because I think we can all sort of mine for that knowledge without it being, taxing or inaccessible. And also, it'll absolutely make for better writing. Thank you so much for that. Um, oh no. I keep doing this. I keep losing my questions. That's okay. I don't need them. They came out of my brain anyway. When you think about nature writing, I know that we've mentioned some books, or you've mentioned some books that you love, some writers that you love and think of when you think about nature writing, but oh, that's so funny. Since I moved inside, I can see they're not nature books. They're like farming and that type of book, but Aldo Leopold was the first thing I saw when I looked over there. Um, do you I'm trying to segue into something specific and I just don't have good phrasing when I try out loud. Do you include things like hunting and survivalist in your thoughts about nature writing, and what does that look like or mean to you?
I've never really been drawn to hunting. I've never had that, never been interested in it. And even though I worked for a natural resources department in Illinois for almost 30 years, and I was surrounded by people who hunted and fished. But I'm allergic to fish, so I can't. Even if I didn't see any point in fishing and pulling them out of the water and having the fish go through all the traumatic experience of that and then throwing it back in. Uh, so I don't fish and uh, I don't hunt, and so those aspects are not part of my writing at all. Um, and that's another category of nature writing, the outdoor writing, um, about those two, hunting and trapping and fishing. And it's just something that I don't have any knowledge about, not much knowledge about, and I don't write about that.
I am sort of delighted by the way you described fishing because I found a picture of myself. Now, I've been a vegetarian for 25 years. Um, I don't have any like good information or lectures to give you, don't worry. Um, but I found a picture of myself fishing the other day. I must have been, I don't know, 9 years old, 8 years old in the picture. And I look simultaneously horrified and delighted with a fish in my hand.
Yeah,
I'll have to show
you
you
know,
one.
it's when I did when I did work for the Illinois Natural History Survey back in the 1990s. The project I worked on was a fish population monitoring program on the Illinois River, and so for 5 years I went out on the river and sampled the fish community, and I was fish fine, but I just can't eat them. And so I actually know a lot about fish, and but not fishing. And that brings up I remembered an interesting book I read quite a few years ago, and a fictional book called Troubled Waters. And it is nature writing, but fiction. And I tried to think of a fictional book that I would consider nature writing. And this book is about a fish that travels from the headwaters of a stream downstream to bigger rivers and eventually ends up in the Mississippi River and follows it all the way to the Gulf. And the book is written from the fish's standpoint. And it's not where the fish can speak to each other and they have names or anything like that. It is about the biology of the river and the fish and everything that the fish encounters. So it's a very unique book. Uh, I I made a
Oh, wow.
copy of the book. I made a copy of the book in the 1990s. I don't know where I got the copy from, but I wanted to read it, and so I made a copy of it. And I've got, just back before you could scan things.
Falling apart. You love that book.
Yeah, it's a great book, and it's not a children's book. It's an adult book, but it reminds me of The Call of the Wild by Jack London, written from the wolf stand or the dog's viewpoint, the dog that is drawn back into the wild. But it's from the dog's standpoint, and this book is from the fish's standpoint. It's
Well, That's
very
another,
interesting.
that's another fiction that is nature writing you just came up with
Yeah,
right quick there.
I don't know if this book is available. You probably could get it in the library from interlibrary loan. Daniel Mannix.
I'm gonna write that down on our little list here. Thank you. Um, Now I'm thinking about if I can think of any nature books that are that are fiction. Um, so we talked about survivalism, um, and
By survivalism, you mean hunkering down in the basement with food and
no, I meant like
gun,
like like I don't know, living in the woods with a knife.
I see. Yeah. I think there was a movie about a man that went up to Alaska
Yeah, I was
and
thinking
to,
of John Krakow. That's him, Into the Wild.
yeah, and he was eaten by a grizzly bear, I think.
Yeah, John Krakow writes these stories of I think they're all nonfiction, and I think that I initially thought that book was written by the the person who died somehow. But he writes these nonfiction books about people who do crazy things. There's one about climbing Everest, which reminds me, both of those things just reminded me. the Midwest Writing Center, has a beautiful poetry book that is some combination of nature and survival and I don't know, mystery. It's called Field Notes from the Expedition Up Devil's Peak. And it's found poetry, but it's invented found poetry. So it reads a little bit like something like oh my gosh, I can't think of any words. House of Leaves. So it's like we hypothetically found this text and we're building the narrative ourselves, but it is about climbing a mountain. So it's a really, really cool book. Um, but the idea of an adventure in nature is what led me to survivalism because I feel like that's just so hot in in popular media. We think the really dramatic stuff is really exciting. We've got we want to do the survival things. We want to see the craziest stories. Um, yeah, so that's what led me there. Um, Now I'm thinking about things that I've read that might interact with this because, like I said, I'm a super novice in this area. Um, so I own Sand County Almanac, and I haven't read Braiding Sweetgrass. I've read Animal Vegetable Miracle by Barbara Kingsolver, which I don't think I would call nature writing, but maybe you would.
I kind of thought about her a little bit too. She wrote a book called Prodigal Summer, which is nature is a big part of that book. And I thought about that when I was trying to think of fiction that would be called nature writing, and that book came to mind. I remember I read it a long time ago, and one of the things I remember about it was the main character in the book knew about where there were some old, mature chestnut trees in the Appalachian Mountains. And, chestnut trees almost went extinct because of the chestnut blight. And they're still around, but they grow and they're basically in the seedling stage and never really make it to mature trees. But she, as the author, Barbara Kingsolver, knew that there were some trees still surviving in the
Yeah,
Appalachian
she's from
Mountains,
there.
and that was what the book was centered around. And so, I would consider that book big parts of it nature writing.
The book of hers I mentioned is it's nonfiction and it's I think a year in her life on a farm. She moved back to Appalachia, and just sort of documented. Um, but I've gone through my own little lists, and there was a comic book I read that I think could count as nature writing, but again, it's so visual. It's called Lure by Lane Milburn. Um, and it's sort of about a dystopian future, but it's so much about plants. Um, I know one of my favorite authors, Thomas King. Some of his books are not at all, don't at all intersect with nature, but some of them interact really a lot with nature. Um, and he's a native person from Canada, so I'm sure that he's doing that on purpose when he's discordant with nature and city stuff. And that reminds me of something I was excited to ask you about, so I hope it's not too annoying a question, but um do you think like if we how do I say this? If we sort of strip we go as metropolitan as one possibly can and we're in the concrete jungle. What do you think of nature writing in that environment when you are so removed from something that would be easy to call nature?
I think there's always nature around, and I mean, even if the you want to write about the spiders in your living room, um, you might be able to have that as a jumping point. But mentioning the concrete jungle, uh, in these big cities like Chicago, those were places where peregrine falcons were reintroduced because they, in the natural setting, they would have nested on cliffs, and the tall buildings are replacements for the cliffs. So you can go up to like Chicago and see peregrine falcons hunting pigeons, and so there's something to write about right there.
That is so cool. I love also learning about pigeons and how they were domesticated and then sort of abandoned is really interesting to me. Um, and there are so many animals. Here's an urban animal is the coyote. Coyotes are more populous where humans are more populous. So I think that's a really fun interact I don't know, entry point maybe.
I
Um,
have to correct myself, though. I call them pigeons, and the birders would be upset with me because they're really called rock doves.
I didn't know
Or
that.
no, I think they changed the name. I think they changed the name again. I think they're now called rock pigeons.
Hmm.
But
But they're clearly
anyway,
doves, though. Like they look like doves. I say
yeah, they
that as
are.
someone who
Yeah.
doesn't know really anything about it.
But the birders, any birder who is watching this might be upset with me because I call them pigeons.
Sorry. But you were speaking for the rest of us who didn't know that.
Right, right. But
Uh,
yeah, about the coyotes, you're right. I mean, they're into the urban areas
they
again.
yeah, they're just like people. Oh, I read a nature book. What do you know? I've read a lot of books about coyotes. Coyote America, highly recommend. But their territories are smaller in urban areas and they're larger in rural areas, just like people, because they get so much of their resources from humans.
Hmm.
Uh, what I'm finding is I can name a lot of poetry that interacts. I can't stop saying intersects, interacts with nature more intimately, not necessarily nature poems, but poems that really depend on nature to say whatever they're saying. But when I look at fiction and nonfiction, we'll say nonfiction that's not inherently a nature book. It seems like the elements of nature are used to ground or propel story more than they are the focal point. I just think that's interesting, I guess.
Yeah, I would like a book like that.
Well, apparently I can think of them.
Yeah.
Um, cool. Okay. I'm always really bad. I get so caught up in talking that I forget to watch the time. So I will let you go here in a moment, I promise. Um, do you have any now I'm looking at your ideas, just so you know. Do you have thoughts on journaling and its relevance or utility in getting into nature writing or as a practice for maybe being present or being in nature?
I think journaling is very important, and for any writer to it's one way where you can write every day and look for things in nature and write those down. And uh, I've been journaling for over 30 years, and now I'll start to go back and look at things that I wrote 30 years ago. And I keep track of, like I mentioned before, I keep track of which birds show up in the springtime and the first time they show up. And I can go back now in my journals and see what happened in 1995 and when the swallows came back, what date, and uh, what I was thinking back then. And like I said, a lot of the journaling I've done out in the wild. Um, I'm a little bit domesticated now after I've gotten married. I'm married almost 20 years, but before that, I used to go out a lot and just wander around in the woods and prairies and any natural areas I could find, take my canoe out on the Illinois River and I would find a place under a nice shaded tree and write a journal entry about what I was looking at. And sometimes those journal entries turn into something more. And so I think that's very important. And also as a record of your life. And I'm not thinking of like a diary, but more of a journal.
I can say when I think of diary, I think of a log.
Yeah,
And when I
right.
think of journaling, I think of whatever the thoughts are or whatever the observations are. Is that what you're thinking too?
Yeah, right, right. So I was writing a lot in the journal about COVID when COVID hit because I thought, one day I might want to look back and say, what was I really thinking during that time? And I think about that because my mother is 99 years old, and I've asked her questions about her life and events, and she doesn't really remember. I wasn't paying a lot of attention, but I had one question I asked her was, "What did you think in 1945 when the atomic bomb was dropped? How did that impact you? What did you think about that?" And she really couldn't answer it. She kind of said, "Yeah, I knew about it, and that meant the war was over." And she didn't say much about it, but I thought if she had written it down in a journal, detailed about what was going through her mind at that point, then you'd have the answer. And I think that's probably an important part of writing at all for documenting things. For if they're published, then you're documenting it for the ages. But if it's not published, if it's a journal for yourself, and I always think when I'm an old man living in a nature, and an old man living in a nursing home, I can look back on those journals and see what I did.
Yeah, I'm a huge advocate for journaling. I think it can be, I mean, for my writing alone, it's beneficial. A lot of the times when I feel like I might have writer's block, when I journal, right after I journal, I'm able to write. It's just really straightforward like that for me. Um but yeah, there are many times when I have wished for documentation of things that just isn't there. And yeah, that's great. That's a wonderful point. Um Thank you for that. And I'd like to ask you if there's anything I should have asked, if anything I missed, anything you'd like to add.
Oh, possibly, but I can't think of it right now.
Well,
I wondered about the market for nature writing today. My impression is there's not much of a market for it.
I think it's a growing market, actually.
Really?
Granted, I it's all about marketing, right? It's about
Yeah,
how you sell the thing, but bookstores anymore have nature sections, and it used to
yeah.
be that nature sections were like, oh, those DK encyclopedias or the Golden Book of Trees, the little Golden Book of Trees. Am I saying that right? I have one. I just don't remember what it's called. And anymore you get more literary stuff. So um, I know this from
I've kind of I've kind of noticed that in bookstores that yeah, there are nature sections, but the nature books tend to be more environmental problems and books about things like that. And the Sigurd Olsen type of nature writing, um, I'm not finding it a lot. And when I when I finished my book Side Channels and I was looking for a publisher for it, um, they were the pub, uh, publishers were kind of telling me, well, if you had a big name, we might be interested in it. But um, so I ended up self-publishing that book, and that is something I did want to mention that I think back when that book came out in 2011, um, self-publishing I think has changed a lot since then, and I think it has a much more. It's not looked down upon like it was then. I think this is a viable way of publishing a book. I enjoyed the experience, and I felt like I learned a lot doing it.
I everything you said is right on, I think. But also, I was thinking about my experience working in bookstores and how I've sort of seen that section or that genre really grow in the last just 10 years. So 2011 is a long time before that at least. But especially with things like oh, what's her name? Kimmerer. Um, Kimmerer. Robin Wall Kimmerer. Um, and writers who, maybe are known as novelists or essay writers of a certain genre, getting into their own little naturalist phases, um, has I think opened the door for the rest of us. But that's certainly something to
Yeah,
look
and
into.
creative nonfiction is a big thing today, and it wasn't as far as I
Pretty brand new,
know
yeah.
back in the 90s. In the 90s, I don't know even know if anybody called it creative nonfiction.
No.
But Edward Abbey's book Desert Solitaire is creative nonfiction.
And there are a
And
lot of books.
actually, it's part.
Go on.
Well, I was going to say part of it though is actually fiction that uh, Edward Abbey, but it's always put in the nature section as nonfiction.
Yeah, that's something I was going to say. I've seen a lot of books based on really when they came out that are shelved as fiction rather than nonfiction, based on how creative nonfiction has expanded and sort of become something people are willing to look at. So, yeah, it's all marketing, which is
Yeah,
difficult
and I
because
think
good
that's
books are
a
good books.
writing creative nonfiction about nature. I think is a great combination, and those are the kind of books I like to read.
Yeah. Yeah, I can agree with that. But I'm really kind of a sucker. I'll read anything. Um, it's rarely disappointing, but it is disappointing sometimes. Um, well, wonderful. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I would love to continue this sometime. I know that I might have that opportunity, but for other folks to also have that opportunity to hang out with you. So look out for me to annoy you about that. I didn't bring my planner with me, so my update on the Midwest Writing Center will be brief. And please hang out for the writing prompt. Sorry, I have to keep clearing my throat, I guess. Um, so at the Midwest Writing Center today, Thursday, April 24th, we have our last Spectra reading of the season, and it is headlining MC Highland and Elizabeth Clark Wessel, who will open the evening at 6 p.m. with a free writing class. Then we've got an open mic and then the featured reading. Those are both really famous poets who are on tour right now for new releases. It's going to be a really excellent event. So I hope folks will come learning for free from such incredible and innovative artists is a really special opportunity. Of course, the first and third Saturday of every month, we have Writers Studio from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., which is where I met Tom. One is online and one is at the Midwest Writing Center, which is the ground floor of the Rock Island Public Library. This Saturday, we have a class online, $20 for members, $30 for non-members. It is called Writing Fear, but it's really relevant to really anyone who's writing a narrative that involves characters because it's really about fleshing out your protagonist such that whatever it or whatever is antagonizing it are really believable. And that's I'm really excited about that. That's being taught by Tatiana Schlody Bonet. Um, you know what? Off the top of my head, that is as much as I can do. I know that we've got a lot of stuff going on in May, but I don't want to get the dates wrong. So, thank you for hanging out with us. Let's get into that writing prompt. Tom, did you want to deliver it or did you want me to?
You can go ahead.
Okay. We would like to ask you to either just step outside, whatever is most convenient, and take an observation and run with it. If you are unable to step outside, if you don't have, say, any plants or animals in your home, I would like for you to look up that book I mentioned, American Wildflowers, and just look at the cover art and use that for your prompt. Give yourself however much time you can, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, set a timer for yourself, write whatever comes. It can be whatever comes is correct. It can be a journal, it can be a poem, it can be a story, an essay, doesn't matter. Um, Thank you for joining us today, and as always, write more light into your life.